My parents were drowning in desperation when they made a deal that would bind me to a blind millionaire, a man I'd never met, a stranger cloaked in wealth and whispered rumors. I thought the wedding night would be the beginning of a life built on duty and silence. But when the bedroom door closed behind us, what unfolded in that darkness shattered every assumption I'd made and revealed a truth so dangerous, it would change everything. But before I take you deeper into that night, I need to pause for just a moment. I'm so grateful you're here with me right now, listening to this story. If it's resonating with you, if you're feeling even a fraction of what I felt, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? I want to know how far this story has traveled, how many hearts it's reached across the world. Your support means everything. Now, let me take you back to where it all began, to the moment my life cracked open like cheap veneer under pressure. The grain of my life was snapped not by dull tools, but by the cold hand of greed. I was standing in my workshop when Brenda delivered the news, her voice flat and transactional, as if she were reading off a supply list instead of dismantling my livelihood. The space around me, a cramped, sawdust-scented sanctuary where I'd spent 20 years honing my craft, suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in with each word she spoke. Part-time Nia. Effective immediately. I didn't respond right away. My hands were still gripping a piece of walnut I'd been hand-planing for a client's dining table, the wood smooth and warm beneath my calloused fingers. I'd learned to read with the way some people read faces. Every grain told a story, every not revealed character. But I couldn't read Brenda's face. Or maybe I could, and I just didn't want to see what was written there. Indifference, calculation, the cold mathematics of profit over people. It's not personal, she continued, adjusting her designer glasses, the kind that cost more than my monthly rent. The company's restructuring. Budget cuts. You understand. I understood perfectly. I understood that 20 years of meticulous work, of transforming damaged furniture into heirlooms, of teaching younger craftspeople the dying art of hand restoration, all of it meant nothing when the quarterly reports came back red. How much? I asked, my voice steady even as my world tilted. 20 hours a week. Maybe less during slow seasons. The chisel I'd been holding clattered to the workbench. 20 hours. It might as well have been zero. The numbers flashed through my mind with brutal clarity. Rent, utilities, groceries, my mother's medication, and now, God, now, the astronomical cost of keeping my father alive. The stroke had come 3 weeks earlier, sudden and devastating. One moment, Dad was laughing at dinner, telling stories about his days working construction. The next, he was crumpled on the kitchen floor, his entire right side paralyzed, his speech slurred beyond recognition. The doctors said he needed specialized treatment, cutting-edge therapy that insurance barely touched. They threw around figures that seemed fictional, 6 figures, maybe more for a chance, just a chance, at recovery. And I had been counting on this job. On full-time hours. On overtime if I could get it. Brenda left without waiting for a response, her heels clicking against the concrete floor like a countdown. When the door closed behind her, I sank onto my work stool and pulled out the red ledger I'd been keeping, a desperate attempt to organize chaos into columns. The numbers stared back at me, unforgiving as stone. Medical bills, $127,000 and climbing. Part-time income, barely enough to cover rent. Savings, depleted 3 months ago. I ran my finger down the page, watching the deficit grow wider with each line. The walls of that workshop, walls I'd painted myself, where I'd hung my tools with pride, suddenly felt like a cage. The sawdust in the air tasted like failure. My phone buzzed. Mom's name flashed on the screen, and I knew before I answered what she would say. The hospital needed another payment. The therapy sessions couldn't wait. Dad's condition was worsening without proper care. Nia, baby, she whispered when I picked up, her voice fractured by exhaustion and fear. They're saying if we can't pay by Friday, they'll have to discharge him to basic care. Basic care, Nia. That means no recovery. That means watching him fade away in some understaffed facility where no one knows his name. I pressed my fist against my mouth, fighting back the scream building in my chest. My father, the man who taught me to measure twice and cut once, who showed me that honest work had dignity even when it didn't have glamour, was being reduced to a line item, a financial burden too heavy for the system to carry. "I'll figure it out, Mama," I said, though I had no idea how. "I promise." When I hung up, I stared at my hands, strong hands, skilled hands, hands that could coax beauty from broken things. But what good were they now? What could they possibly build that would be worth $127,000? The workshop felt colder suddenly, despite the September heat. I looked around at the half-finished projects, the antique chairs waiting for new caning, the mahogany dresser that needed its veneer repaired. Each piece represented someone's history, someone's memory. I had always believed that restoration was a form of love, bringing broken things back to wholeness. But who would restore me? I closed the ledger and locked up the shop, the click of the deadbolt sounding like a cell door slamming shut. I had 72 hours to find a miracle or watch my father slip away into the kind of slow death that comes from giving up. I just didn't know yet that the miracle would come with a price tag of its own, one that couldn't be measured in dollars, but in dignity, truth, and the terrifying unknown of what happens when you sell your future to save your past. The pawnshop smelled like desperation and old leather, a scent I was becoming far too familiar with. I laid my tools on the counter one by one, each placement feeling like an amputation. The Japanese chisels my father had given me for my 30th birthday. The vintage hand planes I'd collected over 2 decades, each one calibrated perfectly to my grip. The brass marking gauge that had belonged to my grandmother, a female carpenter in an era when women weren't supposed to know the difference between a mortise and a tenon. The pawnbroker examined each piece with infuriating slowness, his magnifying glass catching the fluorescent light as he turned my life's work over in his pudgy hands. "Best offer, $1,500, he said finally, not even looking up at me. "They're worth $10,000, easily." My voice cracked despite my attempt at steadiness. "Those chisels alone are $1,500 total. Take it now or leave." I took the money. What choice remained? The cash felt obscene in my pocket, blood money earned from selling off pieces of my soul. It would cover maybe 2 weeks of Dad's medication, nothing more. I walked out of that shop feeling hollowed out, a furniture shell with nothing inside worth saving. My phone rang as I reached my car, an unknown number with a local area code. I almost didn't answer. Bill collectors had been circling like vultures for weeks, and I had no energy left for their scripted sympathy and veiled threats. But something made me swipe to accept. Ms. Nia Brooks. The voice was male, crisp, professionally distant. "My name is Lawrence Hayes. I'm an attorney representing a private client with a rather unusual proposal for you." "Not interested." I started to hang up, but his next words froze my finger over the screen. "It concerns a financial arrangement that would cover all of your father's medical expenses. Lifetime care, Ms. Brooks. Experimental treatments, private facilities, around-the-clock nursing staff, whatever proves necessary. Every penny covered." My heart slammed against my ribs. This is a scam. Nobody offers. "This is not a scam, I assure you." His tone remained maddeningly calm. "My client is Langston Sterling. Perhaps you've heard the name?" I had heard it. Everyone had. Langston Sterling, tech mogul, reclusive billionaire, the man who'd revolutionized data security before disappearing from public life 3 years ago after some kind of catastrophic accident. Rumors swirled around him like smoke, that he was disfigured, that he was dying, that he was mentally unstable from trauma. What does Langston Sterling want with me? The question came out sharper than I intended. I'm nobody. I fix broken furniture for a living, or I did, until yesterday. My client requires a wife, Ms. Brooks, but not in the traditional sense. Hayes's voice took on the mechanical quality of a man who'd rehearsed this speech. Mr. Sterling was rendered completely sightless in an industrial accident 18 months ago. He needs someone of unquestionable integrity to serve as his eyes in business dealings, to act as his legal representative, and to protect his interests from certain family members who would exploit his disability. The words landed like stones in still water, each one creating ripples of disbelief. You're asking me to marry him? A complete stranger? It would be a contractual arrangement, professionally structured. You would live in his residence, attend necessary functions, and provide daily assistance with documents and business matters. In exchange, your father receives comprehensive medical care for the remainder of his life. Your mother would be set up in an accessible, fully paid condominium, and you would receive a substantial monthly stipend for your cooperation. My mouth had gone dry. This was insane. This was the plot of some gothic novel, not something that happened to real people in the real world. Why me specifically? I managed to ask. There must be thousands of. My client has done extensive research, Ms. Brooks. Your background check revealed someone who's never defaulted on a debt, never filed a false insurance claim, never even received a parking ticket. You've spent 2 decades in a dying trade because you believe in the value of restoration, not profit. You've sacrificed your own advancement to care for aging parents. He paused, and I heard papers rustling. Mr. Sterling needs someone whose moral compass is non-negotiable. Someone the courts and his business partners will trust implicitly. This is completely... I couldn't even finish the sentence. Completely what? Insane? Degrading? Terrifying? You have 24 hours to decide, Ms. Brooks. I'm emailing you the preliminary contract now. If you agree, we'll arrange a brief meeting with Mr. Sterling tomorrow afternoon. If not, this conversation never happened, and we'll move on to other candidates. Wait, just... My mind was racing, trying to catch up with the impossible reality of what he was describing. What if we're incompatible? What if I can't do what he needs? The contract includes a 30-day trial period with full compensation. If either party wishes to dissolve the arrangement after that time, your father's care continues for 6 months while you secure other employment. His tone softened slightly, the first hint of humanity breaking through. Ms. Brooks, I've been practicing law for 30 years. I've never seen my client make an offer like this. He's desperate, and from what I understand, so are you. The word desperate hit like a slap. Because he was right. I was drowning, and he'd just thrown me a rope, even if that rope was woven from manipulation and transactional cruelty. 24 hours, Hayes repeated. My direct number is in the email. I'll await your call. The line went dead. I sat in my car outside that pawn shop, my tools gone, my future uncertain, and a contract for marriage to a blind stranger waiting in my inbox. The steering wheel was cold under my grip as I stared through the windshield at nothing, everything, the impossible choice now sitting on my chest like a concrete block. Sell myself, or watch my father die. Some choices aren't really choices at all. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I drove to the 24-hour diner on 5th Street and ordered coffee I wouldn't drink, staring at my phone like it might explode if I opened that email too quickly. When I finally pulled up the contract, the legal language swam before my eyes. Clauses about cohabitation, public appearances, financial distributions, confidentiality agreements. But one number stood out with brutal clarity. The comprehensive medical package for my father was valued at over $2 million across projected care needs. $2 million. For my dignity, my autonomy, my future. I researched Langston Sterling until my eyes burned. The internet offered fragments, puzzle pieces that didn't quite fit together. He'd been a wunderkind, building his data security empire from nothing by age 25. Brilliant, ruthless, notoriously private even before the accident. Then, 18 months ago, an explosion at one of his research facilities. Reports were vague, contradictory, industrial malfunction, possible sabotage, ongoing investigation. And Langston Sterling had emerged sightless, broken, and silent. I found a blurry photo from before the accident. Sharp features, intense eyes, the kind of face that looked perpetually skeptical of everything. Then I found something else. A sealed lawsuit from a former business associate named Gerald Kemper, settled out of court with an NDA so ironclad that even the case number had been scrubbed from public records. What kind of man required that level of secrecy? What was I walking into? By the time I pulled up to my parents' modest rental, dawn was breaking pink and gold over the horizon. The beauty of it felt obscene against the ugliness of my choice. Mom was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with her Bible open and a cup of tea growing cold. She looked up when I entered, and I saw everything I needed to know in her eyes. She'd been praying for a miracle, and somehow, she already knew I'd found one that came with teeth. "Baby girl, you look haunted." She stood slowly, arthritis, making her movements careful. "What's happened now?" I told her everything. The words spilled out in a rush: the pawn shop, the phone call, the impossible offer. I showed her the contract on my phone, watched her face shift from confusion to horror to something that looked like grief. "No, absolutely not." Her voice was firm despite the tears starting to track down her weathered cheeks. "Nia, your soul is not for sale. Even if we are starving. Even if your daddy—" Her voice broke, but she steadied herself. "Even then, baby, this is wrong." "Mama, please listen." I started, but she cut me off. "I am listening. I'm listening to a man who wants to buy my daughter like property, dress it up in legal words, and call it a business arrangement." She gripped my hands, her calluses rough against my palms. "What kind of mother would I be if I let you do this?" "The kind who wants her husband to live." The words came out harsher than I meant them. "Dad has maybe 3 months without proper treatment." 3 months, Mama. Then what? We watch him waste away in some state facility where they warehouse people until they die. Is that better? Is that more dignified than me making a choice to save him? She flinched, but didn't let go of my hands. "And what about you, Nia? What about your life, your future? You think some blind billionaire is offering this out of kindness? Men like that don't do anything without taking more than they give." "I know that." My voice was barely a whisper now. "But I'm 42 years old, Mama. I'm not some innocent girl with a bright future ahead. My future is sawdust and overdue bills. At least this way, Dad gets a real chance. You get security." And I stopped, unsure how to finish that sentence. "You get what, baby?" "A gilded cage." Mom's tears were flowing freely now. "Your grandmother didn't fight to be a carpenter, so her granddaughter could sell herself into servitude. Grandma also taught me that sometimes we sacrifice for the people we love. That's what family means." I pulled her into a hug, feeling her shake against me. "Let me do this, Mama. Let me save him. Please don't make me choose between your approval and his life." We held each other and cried until there were no tears left, just the empty ache of impossible choices and the cruel mathematics of survival. Later, alone in my childhood bedroom with its faded posters and thrift store furniture, I called Lawrence Hayes. "I have conditions," I said before he could speak. "I meet him first alone. No lawyers, no handlers, just him and me. I need to see who I'm binding myself to. I need to look him in the—" I stopped, the irony bitter on my tongue. "I need to assess this myself. That's highly irregular, Ms. Brooks. My client values his privacy. Then he can find someone else to be his seeing-eye wife." The anger felt good, clarifying. "Those are my terms, Mr. Hayes. Take them or move on to your other candidates." A long pause. I could hear him breathing, calculating. "I'll call you back within the hour." He called back in 40 minutes. "Tomorrow afternoon, 2 o'clock. The Sterling Tower penthouse. Security will escort you up. You'll have 30 minutes alone with Mr. Sterling." Hayes's voice was tight with disapproval. "If either of you finds the arrangement unsuitable after that meeting, the offer is void with no further obligation." "Agreed. Thank you." I hung up before he could hear the tremor creeping into my voice. I had 24 hours to prepare myself to meet the man who wanted to own my future. 24 hours to build armor around the terror and grief and desperate hope warring inside me. I pulled up that blurry photo of Langston Sterling again, studying those intense eyes that could no longer see. What kind of man orchestrates his own marriage like a hostile takeover? What was he hiding behind those sealed lawsuits and carefully managed silence? Tomorrow I would find out. Tomorrow, I would walk into the darkness of his world and pray I could find my way back to the light, if there was any light left at all. The Sterling Tower rose 60 stories above the city, like a monument to ambition and isolation. I stood in the marble lobby, feeling grotesquely out of place in my only decent dress, a navy blue sheath I'd worn to my grandmother's funeral 3 years ago. Around me, executives in $1,000 suits moved with purposeful efficiency, their shoes clicking against imported stone like the ticking of expensive watches. Security cleared me through 3 separate checkpoints, each more invasive than the last. They scanned my ID, checked my background, made me surrender my phone and bag. By the time I reached the private elevator to the penthouse, I felt stripped bare, exposed in a way that had nothing to do with the metal detector. The elevator rose with stomach-dropping speed, numbers climbing higher and higher until they stopped at 60. The doors opened directly into the penthouse. No hallway, no buffer between the outside world and Langston Sterling's domain. The space was breathtaking and cold. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around 3 sides, offering a panoramic view of the city sprawled below like a circuit board. The furniture was minimal, expensive, chosen for form rather than comfort. Everything was white, black, or chrome, a colorless world that felt more like a surgical suite than a home. And there, seated in a leather chair facing those enormous windows, was Langston Sterling. He sat perfectly still, unnaturally so, like a statue carved from living flesh. Dark glasses obscured his eyes, their lenses so black they seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His suit was charcoal gray, tailored with precision that spoke of craftsmanship I recognized. Every seam perfect, every line deliberate. His hands rested on the chair's arms, long fingers relaxed but somehow predatory. "Miss Brooks, I presume." His voice was deeper than I'd expected, textured with something between authority and exhaustion. "Please sit. The chair to your left." I sat, the leather creaking slightly under my weight. From this angle, I could see his profile. Sharp jaw, dark hair touched with premature gray at the temples, a thin scar running from his hairline down past where the glasses hit. The accident had left marks after all. "You demanded this meeting." He didn't turn his head toward me, his face still oriented toward the windows. "Most candidates accepted the terms without question. What makes you different, or just more difficult?" The bluntness caught me off guard, but I recovered quickly. "I don't make life-altering decisions based on phone calls from lawyers, Mr. Sterling. Call me old-fashioned." Old-fashioned implies values, principles. He tilted his head slightly. Or perhaps just desperation dressed up as dignity. "Tell me, Miss Brooks, if you had any other option, would you be sitting here now?" The cruelty was casual, almost clinical. I felt my spine straighten, old anger replacing nerves. "If you had any other option, would you be buying a wife through your attorney, Mr. Sterling?" Desperation works both ways. A muscle twitched in his jaw, the first break in his statue-like composure. "Fair enough. Let's be honest, then. You need money for your father's care. I need someone I can trust not to rob me blind while I'm—" He paused, and I heard bitter irony in his voice. "While I'm blind. It's a transaction. Nothing more complicated." Then why the elaborate screening process? Why not just hire a nurse, a personal assistant? I leaned forward slightly. "You're not just buying competence, Mr. Sterling. You're buying loyalty, integrity, things that can't be written into a contract. That's what makes me valuable, not my desperation." He turned then, his head orienting precisely toward my voice despite the glasses hiding any indication of focus. "Very good, Ms. Brooks. You understand the game." He stood abruptly, and I noticed how he moved, carefully controlled, each step measured. I have family members circling like vultures, waiting for any sign of weakness. My sister Iris, her husband Marcus, their insufferable son Jamal. They've been contesting my mental competency, challenging every business decision, filing lawsuits to access my personal accounts. He walked to the windows, one hand trailing along the wall as though following a memorized map. "I need a sentinel, Miss Brooks. Not a loving wife, not a companion, not pity disguised as partnership. I need someone who will sit in meetings and tell me when people are lying, who will read documents and catch the fine print designed to trap me, who will stand between me and the people who think my blindness makes me vulnerable." "And what exactly do I get beyond my father's medical care?" I asked, watching his back, the tension in his shoulders. What happens to me in this arrangement? You get security, financial stability, and the satisfaction of knowing you saved your father's life. He turned back toward me, his voice dropping lower. You also get the pleasure of destroying greedy relatives who mistake disability for weakness. If you're the type who enjoys righteous vengeance, this contract offers plenty of opportunities. The honesty was jarring, almost refreshing after so much manipulation and coded language. You're not even pretending this is anything but mercenary, are you? Would you prefer I did? For the first time, something like humor touched his voice. Should I promise affection, romance, a fairy tale ending? We're both too old for those lies, Ms. Brooks. This is business. Brutal, necessary business. I stood, walking closer to where he stood by the windows. Up close, I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers curled slightly against his thigh. Small tells that suggested the stillness was performance, control masking something more volatile underneath. If I agree to this, Mr. Sterling, I have terms beyond what your lawyer outlined. I want quarterly reviews of my father's care, with full medical reports. I want my mother's housing in writing with protections against any future disputes. And I hesitated, then pushed forward. I want respect. You don't have to like me, but you will not treat me like property you've purchased. He extended his hand toward me, the gesture precise despite his supposed blindness. Agreed, Ms. Brooks. Respect earned through competence. Nothing more, nothing less. I took his hand. His grip was firm, surprisingly warm, and lasted a fraction longer than professional courtesy required. The handshake felt like sealing a pact with something dangerous, thrilling, and potentially devastating. We have a wedding to plan, he said softly, releasing my hand. Something small, legal, efficient. No romance, no pretense. Just two people making a calculated decision to survive. Sounds absolutely perfect, I replied, and meant it more than I wanted to admit. As I left that penthouse, riding the elevator back down to the ordinary world, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just made a deal with someone far more dangerous than a blind man needing help. I just didn't know yet how right I was. The engagement dinner was scheduled for exactly 1 week before the wedding, a formality Langston described as necessary theater to prevent his family from contesting the marriage later. We'd spent the intervening days in careful preparation, reviewing his business holdings, practicing how I described documents and photographs to him, learning the names and faces of people who wanted him destroyed. The penthouse had been transformed for the occasion. Catering staff moved silently through the space, setting up a formal dining arrangement that somehow made the cold room feel even more sterile. I wore a dress Langston's stylist had selected, emerald green silk that cost more than my monthly rent used to be, and felt like a child playing dress-up in someone else's life. Langston stood beside me near the entrance, his hand resting lightly on my arm in a gesture we'd choreographed. To any observer, it would look like casual intimacy. In reality, it was tactical positioning. I was his eyes, his early warning system. They'll arrive precisely on time, he murmured. Iris hates being predictable, but she hates appearing rude even more. She'll use every social grace as a weapon. And I'm supposed to what, exactly? Smile and take it. I kept my voice low. You're supposed to let them underestimate you, then destroy them with competence they never saw coming. His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. You're a carpenter, Nia. You know how to find the weak points in any structure. The elevator chimed exactly at 7. They emerged like a tableau of calculated wealth. Iris Sterling Whitmore in a cream designer suit that screamed old money, her blonde hair swept into a chignon so tight it probably gave her migraines. Beside her, Marcus Whitmore looked every inch the successful hedge fund manager, silver-touched hair, perfect teeth, a watch that caught the light with deliberate flash. And trailing behind them, their son Jamal, 20-something and already wearing the smirk of someone who'd never been denied anything. Langston, darling. Iris's voice dripped with false warmth as she approached, her heels clicking like gunshots. How wonderful that you're finally ready to introduce us to your bride-to-be. The pause before bride-to-be was surgical, designed to cut. Iris, Marcus, Jamal, this is Nia Brooks. Langston's voice remained neutral, but I felt his fingers tighten slightly on my arm. My fiancé. Iris's smile never wavered as her eyes traveled over me with the assessment of an auctioneer evaluating questionable merchandise. How delightful. Langston, you've always been full of surprises. Though I must say, this is quite the unexpected choice. Unexpected how exactly? I asked, keeping my tone pleasant. Well, no offense intended, but you're not exactly from our world, are you? Iris moved closer, and I caught the scent of expensive perfume mixed with something sharper. Predatory interest. I did some research. A furniture restorer? How wonderfully rustic. Tell me, do you work with your hands? I imagine you must have such rough palms. Marcus chuckled, examining his fingernails with studied disinterest. Jamal was already pulling out his phone, not even pretending to care about the conversation. I do work with my hands, I replied evenly. 20 years of restoration, actually. I find there's something honest about taking broken things and making them whole again. Not everyone appreciates craftsmanship anymore, of course. Some people prefer cheap imitations that look expensive from a distance. I let my gaze drift deliberately to Marcus's wrist, where that watch caught the light again. It was beautiful, or it would have been if it were genuine. But I'd spent 2 decades studying fine craftsmanship, and I could spot an amateur forgery at 20 paces. The patina was wrong, applied rather than earned. The engraving on the case was too shallow, done with modern tools trying to mimic antique work. Marcus noticed my attention and pulled his sleeve down slightly, a tell so obvious it was almost embarrassing. How charming, Iris continued, her voice sharpening. Though I must confess, I'm puzzled by this entire arrangement. Langston, darling, you've always been so particular about who you trust. And now you're marrying someone you've known for, what, 2 weeks? A low-rent artisan with no connections, no social standing, no verification of her character beyond whatever background check your lawyers ran. Careful, Iris. Langston's voice dropped to something dangerous. You're about to insult my future wife. I'm simply being practical. She turned to face him directly, her concern theater perfect. You can't see her, Langston. You can't see her expressions, can't read her body language. How can you possibly trust that she won't rob you blind? And forgive the unfortunate phrasing, the moment you sign over legal authority to her. The room had gone silent except for the clink of catering staff in the kitchen. This was the real opening salvo, the testing of boundaries disguised as sisterly concern. I stepped forward slightly, drawing Iris's attention. You're right about one thing, Mrs. Whitmore. I am from a different world than you. I'm from a world where a handshake means something, where your word is your bond, where you don't need lawyers to force you to be decent to your own family. I paused, letting the words settle. But more importantly, I'm someone who notices details. Small things that others might miss. Like how genuine craftsmanship differs from convincing forgeries. Marcus's face went very still. How fascinating, Iris said, her smile now sharp enough to draw blood. Well, I suppose Langston values that sort of observational skill, though I wonder how long such novelty will hold his interest. Dinner was excruciating, 2 hours of verbal fencing disguised as polite conversation. Iris probed for weaknesses, with the precision of a surgeon. Marcus made condescending comments about working-class values that barely masked his contempt. Jamal ignored everyone, occasionally snorting at something on his phone. But I held my ground, answering every jab with calm professionalism, every insult with working class, with that Langston's money couldn't buy. I was his sentinel, just as he'd hired me to be. After dinner, I excused myself to get some air on the balcony. The city sprawled below, millions of lights marking millions of lives simpler than the one I'd bargained myself into. That's when I heard them, Iris and Marcus, standing just inside the glass doors, their voices low but urgent. She's too observant, Marcus. Did you see how she looked at your watch? She knows something's wrong. Iris's cultured voice was raw with fear now. All pretense dropped. We need to break her focus now, before the wedding. Before she starts digging into the accounts. "You're paranoid, Iris." But Marcus sounded nervous. "She's just some carpenter who got lucky. She's no threat to us." "You didn't see her eyes. She sees too much." Iris's shadow moved against the curtain. "We need to act faster than planned. The wedding is in 6 days. After that, she'll have legal standing access to everything. We need to discredit her now, or we lose everything we've worked for." My blood had gone cold. I stayed perfectly still, listening as they discussed strategies to destroy me, planting evidence of theft, fabricating a scandal with my criminal associates, anything to convince Langston I was exactly the fortune hunter they'd accused me of being. When they finally moved away, I remained on that balcony, gripping the railing hard enough to hurt. I'd thought this was just a transaction, a business arrangement to save my father. But I'd walked into something far more dangerous, a war I didn't fully understand yet, with weapons I was only beginning to recognize. And in 6 days, I would be legally bound to a man I barely knew, standing between him and people who would destroy anyone who threatened their access to his fortune. The city lights blurred in my vision, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. What had I gotten myself into? The wedding happened on a Tuesday afternoon in a courthouse that smelled like floor polish and bureaucratic indifference. No flowers, no music, no pretense of romance, just signatures on legal documents and a judge who looked bored enough to fall asleep. Langston's hand found mine during the brief ceremony, his grip steady and somehow reassuring despite the calculated coldness of everything around us. We were married, bound legally, financially, irrevocably. "Welcome to the cage, Mrs. Sterling," Langston murmured as we left the courthouse. But his voice held something new, not warmth exactly, but acknowledgement. We were partners now, for better or catastrophically worse. The real work began immediately. Langston's study became our war room. Every morning, I would arrive to find stacks of documents waiting, contracts, financial reports, board meeting minutes. My job was to be his eyes, to describe not just the words but the inconsistencies, the patterns, the details that didn't align. And I found them everywhere. This quarterly report from Sterling Tech, I said 3 days after the wedding, spreading the pages across his desk. Marcus submitted it for approval yesterday. The numbers look clean on the surface, but there's something wrong with the vendor payments on page 17. Langston sat perfectly still, his head tilted in that focused way he had. "Read them to me. Every line, exactly as written." I did, my voice steady as I listed payment after payment to companies I didn't recognize. Precision Components LLC, Advanced Systems International, Cornerstone Solutions Group. They're all receiving substantial monthly payments, 6 figures each, for services listed as consulting or systems maintenance. And what makes that suspicious? His fingers drummed once against the desk, a rare tell of agitation. The addresses are wrong. I'd spent my lunch break cross-referencing every vendor. Precision Components lists a New York office, but when I checked the building directory, that suite number doesn't exist. Advanced Systems International has a Los Angeles address that's actually a residential strip mall. These aren't real companies, Langston. They're shells. His expression didn't change, but I saw his jaw tighten. How much total? I'd already done the math. Based on these reports alone, Marcus has siphoned approximately $4.3 million over the past 18 months. But these are just the obvious ones. If I dig deeper. His voice was soft, dangerous. Find everything. Every fraudulent payment, every dummy corporation, every forged signature. Build me a case that's absolutely unassailable. We worked in careful secrecy, communicating in hushed tones even in the privacy of the penthouse. I learned to read the tension in Langston's shoulders, the way his stillness became more pronounced when we uncovered something particularly damning. He was playing chess while his family thought he was fumbling in the dark. By the end of the second week, I'd traced the web of corruption to a dozen shell companies, all linked back to offshore accounts in Marcus's name. But there was more. Iris's involvement was deeper than we'd suspected. She'd been systematically transferring intellectual property rights, slowly bleeding away Langston's company assets while positioning herself to take control through legal challenges to his competency. "They're not just stealing money," I told Langston one evening, exhaustion making my voice rough. "They're building a case that you're incapable of managing your own affairs. Every consulting fee Marcus approves, every irregular transaction, they're constructing evidence that the company is being mismanaged under your watch. And then the court appoints a conservator, likely Iris, who coincidentally already has her hands on half the assets." Langston's fingers curled into fists against his chair. "Elegant, really. Rob me blind while making it look like I'm the one who's incompetent." The realization settled between us like frost. This wasn't just greed. It was a calculated dismantling of everything he'd built. I was reviewing another set of documents late Thursday afternoon when my phone rang. Mom's number, but her voice was wrong, shaky, frightened. "Nia, baby, something's happened. You need to come home right now." I drove to their new condo, the accessible ground floor unit with wide doorways and grab bars that Langston's money had provided, with my heart hammering against my ribs. Mom met me at the door, her face pale, Dad's wheelchair visible behind her in the hallway. "We just got back from his therapy session," she said, her hands trembling. The door was locked. Nothing looked disturbed, but when I went into the living room, the antique table lay in ruins. It was a piece I'd restored 5 years ago, a Victorian-era side table with intricate inlay work that had taken me 3 months to complete. I'd given it to my parents as an anniversary gift, and Mom had treasured it, kept fresh flowers on it every week. Now it was destroyed. Not damaged accidentally, destroyed deliberately, methodically. The legs had been sawed through, the top splintered with what looked like repeated blows from a heavy object. The inlay work I'd painstakingly reconstructed was crushed beyond recognition. And resting in the center of the wreckage, stark against the shattered wood, was a single black feather. My hand shook as I picked it up, the barb soft against my fingers. It was real, not synthetic, carefully placed, deliberately chosen. A message written in violence and symbolism. Who would do this? Mom whispered. Why would anyone? Go pack bags for both of you. Enough for a week. My voice sounded distant, mechanical. You're not staying here tonight. Nia, what's going on? What have you gotten us into? I looked at the ruins of my work, that black feather clutched in my fist, and felt rage replace fear. They'd threatened my parents. They'd violated the one safe space I'd managed to secure with this devil's bargain. I've gotten us into a war, Mama, but it's one I'm going to win. Back at the penthouse, I found Langston in his study. I placed the feather on his desk without a word, then described the scene, every detail of the destruction, the precision of the violence, the clear message behind it. His hand found the feather, his fingers tracing its length. When he spoke, his voice was colder than I'd ever heard it. They've made their position clear. They're not just coming after my assets. They're coming after you, your family, anything that supports our partnership. He set the feather down carefully. This changes our timeline. We need to move faster, harder. Are you prepared for that, Nia? Because once we strike, there's no going back. I thought about my mother's terrified face, my father's confusion, the table I'd restored with such care now reduced to kindling. I thought about Iris's whispered threats on the balcony, Marcus's fake watch, the millions they'd stolen while pretending concern. I was prepared the moment they destroyed my work, I said. Tell me what you need me to do. Langston smiled then, a sharp, predatory expression that reminded me he hadn't built an empire by being gentle. We're going to give them exactly what they want, the appearance of victory. And then we're going to destroy them with the evidence they never knew we were gathering. The game had changed. The stakes were no longer just financial. They were personal, dangerous, and absolutely unforgivable. And I was done playing defense. The Sterling Technologies board meeting was scheduled for 10 in the morning on a gray Wednesday that felt like the world holding its breath. Langston and I arrived early, his hand on my arm as we entered the glass-walled conference room on the 45th floor. Below us, the city sprawled indifferent to the battle about to unfold. The board members filed in. 8 executives who'd watched Langston build this company from nothing, now unsure whether his blindness made him a liability. They took their seats with the nervous energy of people who sensed blood in the water but weren't sure whose blood it would be. Iris and Marcus arrived exactly on time, dressed for victory. Iris wore white, a calculated choice, the color of innocence, while Marcus's suit screamed expensive confidence. They took seats directly across from Langston, their body language relaxed, almost triumphant. They thought they'd already won. "Thank you all for coming," Langston began, his voice carrying that eerie calm he maintained in high-stakes situations. "I've called this emergency meeting to address some serious irregularities that have come to my attention. My wife, Nia, will be presenting the findings. She speaks with my full authority." Iris's smile never wavered, but I saw her exchange a quick glance with Marcus. They thought this was theater, a desperate attempt by a blind man to maintain control. I stood, triggering the presentation on the large screen behind me. The first slide showed a network diagram, 12 shell companies, all connected by red lines to a central node labeled M. Whitmore. "Over the past 18 months, I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Marcus Whitmore has systematically embezzled $4.3 million from Sterling Technologies through fraudulent vendor payments. The companies receiving these payments don't actually exist." The room went deadly silent. Marcus's smile faltered slightly. I clicked to the next slide: bank records, transfer documents, incorporation papers. Precision Components LLC, Advanced Systems International, Cornerstone Solutions Group, all registered to false addresses, all receiving substantial monthly payments for services never rendered. The money was then transferred through a series of offshore accounts before landing here. I highlighted a Cayman Islands account with Marcus's name on it. "This is absurd," Marcus said, his voice tight but controlled. "Those are legitimate consulting firms. I have contracts." "You have forged contracts," I cut him off, displaying the documents side by side with verified company records. "The signatures don't match. The dates are backdated. And the addresses don't exist. I personally visited 3 of these locations. One was a laundromat. Another was a vacant lot." Board members were leaning forward now, studying the evidence with growing alarm. The company's CFO looked physically ill. "But the embezzlement is only part of the story," I continued, my carpenter's hands steady as I advanced the slides. "Iris Sterling Whitmore has been systematically transferring intellectual property rights and patent holdings to a private trust she controls, apparently in preparation for a legal challenge to Langston's competency." Iris stood abruptly. "You have no right to make these accusations. This is slander, defamation." "It's documentation," I replied, displaying the transfer records. "Signed, notarized, and filed with the appropriate agencies. You've been bleeding this company dry while building a legal case that your brother is unfit to run it. The plan was elegant: steal everything, then use the resulting chaos as evidence of his incompetence." "Langston, you can't possibly believe this gold-digging nobody over your own family," Iris said, her voice rising with something between rage and panic. "She's manipulating you, using your disability against you." "My wife sees very clearly," Langston said softly, and there was something dangerous in his tone. "Perhaps more clearly than anyone else in this room." Marcus made his move then. He lunged across the table, reaching for the evidence folder in front of me with desperate speed. His fingers were inches from the documents when Langston's hand shot out, intercepting Marcus's wrist with perfect precision. The speed was inhuman for a blind man. The accuracy impossible. Langston's grip twisted, and Marcus cried out in pain as he was forced back into his seat. The entire board recoiled in shock, because what we'd all just witnessed was physically impossible for someone who couldn't see. "How did you?" Marcus gasped, cradling his wrist. The room erupted. Board members were on their feet, voices overlapping in confusion and alarm. Iris was backing toward the door, her white suit now looking more like a surrender flag than a statement of innocence. "Security to conference room 45, I said into the phone, my voice cutting through the chaos. "We need immediate assistance and police presence." You bastard, Iris hissed at Langston, her composure completely shattered. You've been lying this whole time. Playing blind, playing weak. You manipulative. Careful, Iris, Langston said, still seated, still wearing those impenetrable dark glasses. Everything you say now is being recorded for the authorities. Security burst through the doors, followed moments later by 2 police officers I recognized from our earlier coordination. They'd been waiting in a conference room down the hall, ready for exactly this moment. You should have stayed in the dark, Langston. Iris screamed as the officers approached her. Your secret about the accident will come out. Everyone will know what really happened, what you really are. Iris Sterling Whitmore, Marcus Whitmore, you're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy, one officer stated, pulling out handcuffs. You have the right to remain silent. This isn't over. Marcus snarled as they cuffed him, his expensive suit rumpling, his fake watch catching the light one last time. You think you've won, but when the truth comes out about that accident. Take them out, Langston said quietly, and the officers complied, dragging the still screaming Iris and protesting Marcus from the room. The silence they left behind was deafening. The board members slowly retook their seats, their faces showing various combinations of shock, confusion, and dawning understanding. The CFO cleared his throat. Mr. Sterling, I think we need to discuss what just happened. Your reaction time will be addressed in a separate meeting, Langston said, removing his dark glasses with deliberate slowness. His eyes were clear, focused, and looking directly at each board member in turn. What you need to know right now is that Sterling Technologies has been secured against internal threats. The evidence of fraud will be handed over to federal prosecutors. And going forward, my wife will serve as my official corporate representative with full authority to act on my behalf in all business matters. He stood, finding my hand with unerring accuracy. This meeting is adjourned. Nia, we're leaving now. As we walked out of that conference room, past the stunned faces and whispered conversations, past the evidence of our victory, I felt his fingers tighten around mine. We'd won the battle. We'd exposed the corruption, saved the company, destroyed our enemies. But Iris's final threat echoed in my mind like a warning bell. Your secret about the accident will come out. What secret was she talking about? And what would it cost us when the truth finally emerged? We didn't speak during the drive back to the penthouse. Langston sat beside me in the back of the town car, those dark glasses still in place, his profile carved from stone. Victory should have felt triumphant, but instead it sat heavy in my chest like undigested truth. The penthouse felt different when we entered. The same stark white and chrome, the same floor-to-ceiling windows, but the air itself seemed charged with something unspoken, dangerous. Langston moved through the space with his usual careful precision, one hand trailing along familiar surfaces. We should celebrate, I said, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. We won, after all. Your family's going to prison. The company's secure. Should we? He stopped near the windows, his back to me. Or should we finally have the conversation we've been avoiding since that board meeting? My heart started hammering. I don't know what. Don't lie to me, Nia. He turned, and even with those glasses hiding his eyes, I could feel the weight of his attention. You're too observant for your own good. You saw what happened when Marcus lunged at you. The speed, the accuracy. You've been thinking about it all day. I had been. The image replayed in my mind like a glitch in reality, that impossible intercept, the perfect precision of his grip. So, explain it to me. How does a blind man move like that? Come to my study, he said quietly. No more public performances. No more pretense. Just truth, however ugly it might be. I followed him down the hallway to his private study, a room I'd only entered a handful of times, always feeling like an intruder in sacred space. He gestured to the leather chair facing his desk, and I sat, my carpenter's instinct screaming that something fundamental was about to break. Langston stood by the window, the city lights painting shadows across his face. Then, with movements that felt ritualistic, final, he reached up and removed the dark glasses. His eyes were clear. Completely, devastatingly clear. They were gray-green, sharp with intelligence, and looking directly at me with perfect focus. Not the unfocused gaze of blindness, not the careful orientation toward sound. He was seeing me, had been seeing me all along. The silence was a punch to my gut. Not blindness, but a cage of his own making. You can see. The words came out flat, dead. How long? I regained my sight about a year after the accident. 14 months ago, to be precise. His voice was steady, clinical, like he was discussing stock portfolios instead of the fundamental lie that had defined our entire relationship. The recovery was gradual, unexpected. The doctors called it miraculous. I couldn't breathe. The room was tilting, reality rearranging itself into something grotesque. You've been lying this entire time. The contract, the marriage, everything, it was all based on a lie. It was based on necessity, he corrected, and the calm in his voice made me want to scream. Let me explain. Explain? I stood abruptly, rage flooding through me like gasoline finding a spark. You want to explain how you manipulated me into marrying you under completely false pretenses? How you made me believe I was helping someone vulnerable, when really, I was just what? A test subject? An experiment. You were a necessity, he said, and finally, I heard something crack in that perfect control. After the accident, when I was actually blind, my fiancée at the time, Victoria, she stayed. Devoted, caring, the picture of loyalty. Until I started recovering financially, started rebuilding. Then I caught her trying to forge documents, transfer assets. She'd been planning to have me declared incompetent, marry me for legal control, then institutionalize me. His hands curled into fists against his sides. When my sight returned, I didn't tell anyone. I watched, tested, observed. And I realized everyone around me was performing. My family, my business partners, everyone. They all thought I was vulnerable, and they all revealed their true nature. Greed, pity, manipulation. So, you decided to what exactly? Create an elaborate scheme to trap someone into marrying you. My voice was shaking now, years of control fracturing under the weight of betrayal. You hired investigators to find the most desperate, most honest person you could exploit. I needed to find someone whose character was stronger than circumstance, he interrupted, stepping toward me. Someone who would choose integrity even when faced with impossible choices. Someone who wouldn't exploit perceived weakness for personal gain. You needed a puppet, I shouted, and it felt good to finally release the rage. Someone you could control completely, while pretending to be helpless. You manufactured this entire situation, Langston. My father's medical care, my mother's housing, our marriage, all of it built on lies. Your father's care is real. Your mother's security is real. The danger from my family was real. His voice rose to match mine. Everything I've given you is real, Nia. The only thing that wasn't real was the blindness. The only thing? I laughed, and it sounded broken. That was the entire foundation. I married you because I thought you needed protection, needed help. I convinced myself this mercenary arrangement had some dignity because at least I was helping someone vulnerable. But you were never vulnerable. You were just testing me, manipulating me, seeing if I'd pass your sick experiment. The tears were coming now, hot and furious. Do you have any idea how degrading that is? To realize that every moment of supposed partnership was actually surveillance? That you were watching me, judging me, assessing whether I met your standards, all while I thought I was being your eyes. You were being my eyes, he said, and now he was close enough that I could see the pain in those clear, seeing eyes. Not because I couldn't see, but because I needed someone who would see the truth and tell it to me regardless of consequences. Someone whose observations I could trust absolutely. Built on absolute dishonesty. I grabbed my purse, needing to move, to escape before I completely shattered. You want to talk about trust, Langston? You destroyed any possibility of trust the moment you decided to build our entire relationship on a fundamental lie. Nia, wait. He reached for me, and I jerked away like his touch was poison. Don't touch me. Don't you dare touch me with hands that could always see exactly where I was. My voice cracked. I need to think. I need to figure out what's real and what was performance. I can't do that here, in your glass cage where you've been watching me like a specimen this whole time. Where will you go? For the first time, he sounded uncertain, almost afraid. Anywhere but here. I headed for the door, my vision blurred with tears. You wanted someone with integrity, with character? Well, here's some character for you. I don't stay with liars, no matter how wealthy they are or how noble their reasons supposedly were. The contract can go straight to hell. I finished. Sue me if you want. Have your lawyers tear me apart. But I'm done being your test subject, your experiment in human nature, your proof that one honest person exists in your cynical worldview. I made it to the elevator before the sobs came, pressing myself into the corner as it descended, as the numbers counted down my escape from the beautiful prison I'd sold myself into. The doors opened to the lobby, and I walked out into the night air, gulping it down like I'd been drowning. Behind me, 60 floors up, Langston Sterling stood alone in his penthouse with eyes that could see everything except how to undo what he'd broken. And I walked into the darkness, not knowing if I'd ever find my way back to anything that felt like truth. I spent that night in a cheap hotel near the airport, the kind of place where the carpet was stained and the walls were thin enough to hear other people's lives bleeding through. I didn't sleep. I just sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone, at the dozens of missed calls from Langston that I couldn't bring myself to answer or delete. By dawn, I'd cried myself empty. What remained was something harder, clearer. The carpenter in me, the part that knew how to assess structural damage and determine what could be saved and what needed to be torn down completely. The question wasn't whether Langston had lied. He had, fundamentally and completely. The question was whether the person I'd become in that lie, the fierce sentinel who'd taken down his corrupt family, the woman who'd found her own strength in protecting someone else, whether that person was real or just another performance. And I realized, sitting in that horrible hotel room with its flickering neon sign casting shadows on the walls, that she was the most real I'd ever been. I returned to the penthouse the next afternoon. Not because I'd forgiven him. I wasn't sure I ever could, but because we had unfinished business, and I was done running from hard conversations. Langston was in his study, still wearing those dark glasses despite knowing I knew the truth. He looked up when I entered, and even through the lenses I could sense the exhaustion, the fear he was trying to hide behind that controlled facade. "You came back," he said quietly. "Don't misunderstand." I sat in the chair across from his desk, maintaining distance. "I came back to talk, not to forgive. Not yet, maybe not ever. But I need to understand why. Not the practical reasons, not the business justifications. Why did you think this was acceptable?" He was silent for a long moment, his fingers drumming once against the desk in that rare tell of agitation. Then he reached up and removed the glasses, setting them aside with finality. "Victoria destroyed me," he said finally, his clear eyes meeting mine with painful directness. Not the accident, not the blindness. Her betrayal. The realization that the woman I'd planned to spend my life with had been waiting for me to become vulnerable enough to exploit. When I regained my sight and saw what she'd become, what everyone had become in my supposed weakness. His voice cracked slightly. I couldn't trust my own perception anymore. Every gesture of kindness felt like strategy. Every relationship felt transactional. I was drowning in cynicism, Nia. And I needed proof, desperate, absolute proof, that genuine character still existed somewhere in this world. "So, you made me your proof." My voice was softer now, the rage giving way to something more complicated. "You needed me to pass your test, so you could believe humanity wasn't completely rotten. I needed you to save me from becoming the monster that trauma was turning me into," he corrected, leaning forward. "And yes, I manipulated the situation. I created false pretenses. I tested you without consent. All of that is unforgivable, and I know it." He stood, moving to the window, his shoulders tense. "But here's what I didn't plan for, what I couldn't have predicted. I fell in love with you. Not with your performance, not with your compliance. With your fire, your refusal to be diminished, your absolute insistence on dignity, even when I was paying for your cooperation. You fell in love with me while lying to me every single day. I stood as well, needing to meet him as an equal rather than sitting in supplication. Do you understand how that's not romantic, Langston? It's just sad and broken and cruel. I know that. He turned to face me fully. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know what I did was manipulative and wrong. But I also know that when Marcus lunged at you, my first instinct wasn't to protect my secret. It was to protect you. That when Iris threatened you, I wanted to destroy her not for the embezzlement, but for daring to hurt the person I'd come to. Don't say love. I cut him off, but my voice wavered. Don't make this about love when it started as an experiment. Then what do you want me to call it? His voice rose with frustration and pain. What do you call the feeling when someone becomes more essential than breath? When the thought of them walking away tears something fundamental inside you. When you realize that the test you designed has revealed your own character far more than theirs. I call it complicated, I said, and felt tears threatening again. I call it messy and damaged and built on a foundation of lies that I don't know how to reconcile with the moments of genuine connection we've shared. I moved closer to him, close enough to see the vulnerability in those eyes that could see everything. But here's what I realized last night, sitting in that awful hotel room. The woman I became while fighting alongside you, she was real. The strength I found, the purpose, the sense that I was finally worth more than my ability to fix broken things, that was real. You didn't create that, Langston. You just gave me the arena to discover it. Nia, his voice was raw now, stripped of all the controlled precision. I'm not done. I held up my hand. I can't forgive the deception, not yet. Maybe not ever completely. But I can acknowledge that we found something true in the middle of the lies. We built trust in combat. We learned each other's character not through romantic dinners, but through war councils. And somehow, impossibly, that makes it more real than most relationships built on supposed honesty. I took his hand, feeling the warmth of it, the slight tremor that revealed his fear. So here's my terms, since you're so fond of contracts. We start over, but honestly this time. No more tests, no more performances. You see me with those clear eyes, and I see you. Not the blind mogul, not the manipulative schemer, but the broken man who needed proof that goodness exists. And if we fail, he asked, his fingers tightening around mine, if honesty reveals we're incompatible after all, then we fail as equals who tried, I said. Not as puppeteer and puppet, not as test and subject. As two damaged people who found each other in the wreckage and decided to try building something real from the ruins. He pulled me closer, his forehead resting against mine. I love you, Mia Brooks Sterling. That's the only truth that matters to me now. I love you too, I whispered, and felt the words settle like stones finding their place in a foundation. Even though you're a manipulative bastard who broke my trust and built our relationship on lies. Even though this is the most complicated, messy, impossible love story that anyone could imagine. I love you anyway. His kiss tasted like relief and regret, like new beginnings built on fractured endings. It wasn't the fairy tale ending I might have dreamed of as a girl, no perfect prince, no uncomplicated happily ever after. It was better. It was real. So, that's my story. A strange, complicated fairy tale about a carpenter who married a supposedly blind billionaire and discovered that nothing about love is ever simple or pure. We're still together, Langston and I. Still fighting, still building trust brick by painful brick, still learning what it means to love someone whose trauma made them cruel before it made them honest. My father's health has improved remarkably with proper care. My mother stopped asking if I'm happy. She can see that happy is too simple a word for what I am. I'm challenged, respected, loved in a way that's complicated and fierce and absolutely earned. Maybe we all wear invisible scars. Maybe the best relationships aren't the ones that start clean and stay perfect, but the ones that start broken and decide to heal together. Maybe love isn't about finding someone who never hurts you, but finding someone worth forgiving when they inevitably do. So if you're listening right now, wherever you are in the world, whether you're in a situation that feels impossible, whether you've been hurt by the people who are supposed to protect you, whether you've made choices you're not proud of just to survive, know this: your story isn't over. Your worth isn't measured by your desperation or the deals you've made with it. Sometimes the cage we think we're trapped in is actually the chrysalis we needed to transform into something stronger, fiercer, more authentically ourselves. And sometimes, just sometimes, the person who broke you is the same person who helps you rebuild into something beautiful. Did you like my story? If it resonated with you, please leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what choices you've made in the name of love or survival. I want to know I'm not alone in this complicated, messy, absolutely human experience of trying to be good in a world that doesn't always reward goodness. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. By the way, don't forget to subscribe. It encourages me to keep bringing more stories like this. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.